Introduce our speaker this afternoon, Lindsay Day. Lindsay
Hello.
graduated from Virginia Tech in 2014, where she studied horticulture and entomology. She joined the Saunders Brothers team 6 years ago as propagation and quality control, but has recently moved into marketing. As marketing manager for New Gen Boxwood, she enjoys sharing the message of the future of Boxwood with the industry. Welcome, Lindsay. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you all today. Like you said, my name is Lindsay. I've been with Saunders Brothers for a little over 6 years now. And my experience is in production horticulture, and I studied horticulture, but have recently sort of moved into a role that focuses on boxwood. And so I'm here to share with you all today about the future of boxwood from the Saunders Brothers perspective. If you're not familiar with Saunders Brothers, we are a wholesale nursery in Piney River, Virginia, right in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, right sort of in between Charlottesville and Lynchburg. Beautiful area, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but that's where the most beautiful places are. I will also warn you and apologize in advance if there's any dog barking in the background. They've been quiet all day, so it's probably about time for them to be loud. So just in case, we'll just roll on. So anyway, we're just gonna sort of get you through the kind of how my presentation is gonna go today. Obviously, if we're looking towards the future, we have to start by looking into the past to have how we got here today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about research and how we got into that, into the better boxwood cultivars, some best management practices, and then we'll finish up with the future of boxwoods. So let's start looking into the past. So Saunders Brothers the Saunders family has had a dedication to boxwood for many, many years. It all started in 1947 with Paul Saunders, or as I know him, Mr. Saunders. And his mother, Mildred. She was a boxwood enthusiast, an enthusiastic gardener in Nelson County. And so the story goes that one day she was out pruning her English boxwood hedges, and Paul followed behind her and grabbing some boxwood clippings. He had learned how to propagate boxwood from his teacher, Mr. Atto, who was a nurseryman and teacher in the area. And so he decided to take those cuttings and put them in some soil. He planted 77 and 25 of them rooted, and that became the genesis of the Saunders Brothers Boxwood Nursery. Excited about his success with those first 25 cuttings that rooted. Later that same year, he decided to stick 1,000 cuttings of English boxwood. It was part of a 4-H home grounds beautification project that he was working on. Pictured here is John Whitehead, who was the county farm agent, who continued to encourage him to continue planting boxwood. He was there. Mr. Saunders will tell you the story about when he met Mr. Whitehead. He asked, what are you going to do with all these boxwood? And Paul said, I don't know, but I like planting them. So he just kept on planting them. As the nursery grew, so did the Saunders family. He met his wife Tatum in 1955 at a 4-H party. He actually recalls that one of their early dates was stripping boxwood cuttings for propagation. They have the wild dating scene in Nelson County, Virginia. They were later married, and they brought 7 sons into this world, as well as 2 adopted sons. Those boys sort of grew up in the nursery and in the orchard. We're a wholesale nursery and orchard, forgot to mention that because I'm so focused on the boxwoods. But they grew up in the nursery. Bennett Saunders will tell you that if you were at the dinner table the night before, you were expected to be at the nursery 8 a.m. every day except for Sunday. And that went for the boys, that went for their friends, that went for whoever came for dinner, had to work the next day. So of those 7 boys, 4 of those brothers still run the nursery today. That's Robert Saunders on the left, Tom Saunders next to him, Paul Saunders in the middle, Bennett Saunders, and then Jim on the right. In fact, most days, Paul still comes into the office and visits and drives around the nursery and sees what's going on. So that's sort of the story of how boxwood became sort of a thing for the Saunders brothers. Now, everything started to change in the 1970s. So up until that point, most of the boxwood industry was 2 varieties. It was English boxwood and it was American boxwood. But even more predominantly, it was English boxwood, Buxus sempervirens, fruiticosa. And in the 70s, you started to see what's known as boxwood decline. It's kind of it's not really a disease or anything. It's kind of a multifaceted problem where you just see that English boxwood get to a certain age and they just start to decline. They just start to die very slowly. And so this kind of set off a light bulb in Mr. Saunders and Paul's head that maybe we needed to start researching that there were different varieties of boxwoods that were out there in the industry. They just, most people were planting just English and American. So that began the dedication to research and collecting different cultivars. So now we're going to start to talk about how that research kind of developed. So in the 70s and the 80s, we started to see new cultivars emerging, started to bring in some of the Japanese and Korean boxwood, those Asiatic species, the Buxus microphylla, the Buxus sinica insularis, those varieties started to show up, as well as the Sheridan cultivars, which were developed in Ontario, Canada, or the Green series, the Green Velvet, Green Mountain. Those hybrid boxes also showed up kind of around the same time. So you started to get these introductions into the industry of, things other than just Buxus sempervirens. So this is where Saunders brothers, Paul Saunders, started to bring in a bunch of these different cultivars and create a collection at the nursery. In fact, that collection is still there today. It's probably one of the biggest boxwood collections, definitely in Virginia. And that's got, they've got hundreds of different plants that they've collected through the years of all of these different varieties. And then they've used them for research purposes. So that's kind of where they showed up. But obviously, as you introduce new plants into the thing, there's the space for new pests and diseases. So one of those things is boxwood leaf miner, which is a pretty common boxwood pest here in the mid-Atlantic region. And so as they had built this collection, they started to notice that there was a significant difference in resistance to boxwood leaf miner based on the different cultivars and varieties of boxwoods. So early in the 2000s, Saunders brothers took sort of this initiative to do some testing to kind of create an archive to delineate the species and, show where the genetics resistance to this pest is. So this is, you can see the picture dated June of 2009. This is Marshall Saunders Bennett's son, who was there helping doing some research. I think this photo's taken at the Blandy Experimental Farm near Winchester. So they had taken, different varieties, different cultivars, and started to do some research. They also brought in a retired nematologist. This is Bob Dunn. He spent hours and hours looking at thousands and thousands of leaves under the dissecting microscope. He went through and he cut them open and he counted live larvae so that they could do this research and kind of, create this archive of plants that had this genetic resistance. And then everything changed in 2011. Most of these, boxwood leaf miner is more of an aesthetic pest. If it gets ahead of you, it can be a big problem. But then everything really changed when boxwood blight was introduced to the United States. So showed up in the US fall of 2011. And that was really kind of, as boxwood growers, obviously the Saunders are very concerned about the effect that this would have on the boxwood industry. So that winter they sent a team, a group of people from Saunders Brothers actually went to Europe because the disease has been present in Europe before that. And they talked to some growers and just to get an idea of how boxwood blight had affected that industry. And I'll point out the grower up in the right-hand corner because I'm going to come back to him. He was incredibly important in kind of introducing Saunders Brothers to this, to the concept of, genetic tolerance to boxwood blight as well. But I'm going to interrupt by doing a brief overview of boxwood blight for anybody who's not familiar with it. Now this is sort of surface level. I'm going to kind of zip through and give you the basic, overview of the disease.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Before you jump into boxwood blight, we've got a question asking for management options, chemical and organic approach to leaf miners. Is that something you're comfortable answering, or I can pull up from our pest management guide and post that as post those options?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So in fact, I would even point you to a resource. We just actually created a whole page during all the COVID stuff. We've been working on the New Gen Boxwood website, and we have a whole detailed page. If you want to write it down, it's just www.newgenboxwood.com, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. But there's a page that kind of goes in depth about the life cycle of boxwood leaf miner, and it also has chemical recommendations of how to treat for it. The recommended in the research that we've done, so Saunders Brothers did a bunch of research, not only in genetic resistance to the pest, but also in treatment options. And the conclusion that we've come to over the years is that an annual application of a systemic insecticide, they've seen the most of efficacy with the imidacloprid, which is one of the neonicotinoids, but it's an annual application in sort of the end of June, early July that targets the larva that, so skipping into the life cycle, I'll try not to go on too much of a tangent because I can talk about boxwood leaf miner all day too. But the adults hatch in early spring, lay their eggs in the early spring. The larvae start to grow, and then they start feeding in like the late spring, early summer. So a single systemic application kind of knocks out all of the larvae that are inside that leaf. The adults tend to be really hard to access, and so it's if you just treat once, and that'll kind of knock down the whole entire population. So we recommend just one single application a year, and you know, monitoring levels. If you don't have the pest, you don't need to treat for it, kind of thing. So if that helps. Otherwise, I'd recommend going to that website. There's tons of information. If I zip through the presentation quick enough, I'm happy to share my screen and I can show you that page if that works.
I think that's great, Lindsay. Thank you.
Okay. Sure, yeah. Because I can show you, there's also a page on boxwood blight. So, you know, we'll look at that at the end. Just don't let me forget. So yeah, jumping back into boxwood blight, it's a fungal disease that was found in the US in 2011. Like I said, it had been in Europe since the 90s. Arguably, it had been there before that. There's potential that it was there and it hadn't been diagnosed yet because they didn't know what the pathogen was, but more or less it's known since the 1990s. It was introduced, it started in North Carolina and Oregon, I think also in Connecticut, and it kind of has spread throughout the United States since then, you know, in the ways that plants move. As you can see, this map, this is actually the most recent map that Dr. Swan Hong with the Virginia Tech Extension sent this to me, but it's, you know, as you can see, it's spread kind of all over the coastal regions where a lot of the horticulture areas are in the US. And so, and there continue to be cases year after year. I don't know if you all are familiar with the boxwood disease triangle, but it's just a visual tool that helps represent the three essential components of a plant disease. All three of these pieces need to exist in order for the disease to be present on the plants. So we're just going to kind of go over those. When we talk about best management practices and how to avoid the disease, we're going to sort of pinpoint back to this disease triangle. So each one kind of works with breaking off a piece of this triangle, and therefore the disease won't be present. Starting with the host, the only known host of this plant are members of the Boxaceae family, boxwood blight, boxwood family. Specifically the Buxus genus. So all cultivars and varieties within the Buxus species are known to be susceptible to the disease to varying degrees. So like in a laboratory setting, all different varieties will be infected by the pathogen, but the degree to how that disease moves in the plant is varied. And that's when we talk about genetic resistance, we're gonna sort of talk about that. Also Pachysandra, Japanese spurge, which is a common, ground cover that's planted alongside boxwood, will get the disease, as well as Sarcococca or common box. So I think they're doing research now to other plants that could potentially be hosts or different things like that. But as of right now, it's only members of the Boxaceae family are known to host the disease. Like I said, it is a fungus. The scientific name for is Cylindrocladium buxicola, or Calinectria pseudonaviculata. I think Calinectria pseudonaviculata is the most common one that you see, but they're the same disease. It's just different names. Taxonomists just trying to keep us on our toes. It is characterized by heavy sticky spores. So they settle in their sticky spores and they have a physical movement. So they either move in water or through water splashing, or they move physically either by sticking to clothes or tools or animals or debris. So they have to be physically moved from plant to plant or within the plant. No air movement or anything like that. It has to be moved physically. And the last note is that the pathogen can survive in the soil. There are varying reports on how long it can survive in the soil. The disease will go inactive, but most reports say that it can survive in the soil for a while. So just keep that in mind. Environmental conditions. So think warm, hot, humid conditions, kind of on a day like today in Central Virginia. It's going to be most active in between 60 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I said, humid conditions, rainy conditions, areas of prolonged wetness. Like I said, it needs that water to move through for the spores to move and continue infecting. One thing about the temperature is when the disease is going to be infecting is in 60 to 77. But outside of that, it doesn't kill the pathogen. It just, the disease will go, the pathogen will go inactive. So like in the winter and things like that, it may not be spreading, but it could still be present. So that's just one thing to think about. And then other environmental conditions, back to prolonged wetness, humid, little air movement. Research has been shown that just by giving leaves 3 hours to dry or have a 3-hour dry period, you can drastically decrease the infection rate. So it's really just essential to kind of, we're going to talk about cultural practices that increase air movement and different things like that. So as far as symptoms go, there are 3 main symptoms. The first one we talk about is a leaf spot. Leaf spots are always hard because a leaf spot is a leaf spot. They all look so similar. So I'm going to talk about why this one looks a little bit different. It's very distinct. It's very round, almost target-like or bullseye-like. You can see, a couple of these pictures. It starts sort of, that second picture is going to look, it's going to start much smaller as just a spot and it's going to go all the way through the leaf. So you'll be able to look on either side of the leaf and see the spot. And then it's going to create this light colored halo around a dark spot. And then they're going to see a dark rim around that halo. So it's going to be very dark black like you see in that third picture, or a really dark brown like in the first picture. So very polka dotty sort of look to it. The next thing you're going to see is going to be the streaking on the stems. Now this is probably one of the most defining distinct features that you'll see, are these dark lesions that are on the stems. These are actually the fruiting body of the spores. Very distinct. It looks like somebody took a grease pen and just sort of marked down the side of the branch. And it's on the outside of the stem, not on the inside. It's right there. You can see it on the outside of the stem. Very dark, kind of very obvious, especially obvious after the defoliation, which is sort of the next main symptom you'll notice. There are some other boxwood diseases that cause like leaves to either spot or turn different colors, but they don't cause defoliation to the same degree that boxwood blight does. It starts in the lower part of the plant or the middle section of the plant and kind of expands from there. In fact, one time I was talking to our nursery inspector through VDAX, and he said that when he was looking for boxwood blight or when he's expecting houses, like he says he'll notice it's because one spot and then it's kind of spread out from there. And that's again from that water splashing, or it'll be down a walkway because it'll have not moved through there. And you'll see that with the defoliation. And also the other thing is that it happens very rapidly. So a small plant can be, if the disease in perfect condition can defoliate in a matter of weeks. So you really that defoliation happens, the leaves drop very quickly because they've got spores. The way the disease works is they got spores, and so it continues to splash around and the disease continues to spread. So, which is working against your favor, but that's how the disease wants to work. one of the things I wanted to point out about this picture, the second picture that's in, that plant is facing, the spot that you see where the defoliation occurs is facing due north, and then the other side of the plant is facing south. So the part of the plant that gets more sunlight, so that the leaves are drying quicker, is not defoliating as quickly because the disease isn't moving as quickly on that side of the plant because of that dry time. So when I talk about, you know, pruning for air movement and things like that, it's really important because it can really slow down the spread of this disease. So that's our brief interlude about boxwood blight. We're going to jump back into how the story kind of manifests. So after visiting the UK and visiting around Europe in 2011, that grower that I pictured before, he spoke with Bennett and our team about noticing that there was a distinct difference between in resistance to the disease based on the genetics of the plant. So different cultivars were showing much higher rates of survivability versus other plants which were much more susceptible. I'm going to talk about the most susceptible in a minute. So this got them thinking, and they created a research project with North Carolina State University, with Kelly Ivers. They did research there for 2 years. Saunders Brothers had, you know, they had this germplasm, and they had all of these different cultivars on hand. And so they sent, you know, hundreds of plants down to become part of this research so that they could find some answers to this disease. In the bottom picture, you can see Bob Dunnigan. You know, up in the top, you've got, that's our Saunders Brothers trucks headed down to North Carolina with some plants to hopefully get some answers. Quickly, early on in the research, you could see that there was hope. There was hope in this genetic resistance to the disease. And you started to really see this kind of clear delineation between these varieties. So this is a research, this is the kind of one of the first, I guess it's probably easier to see. Normally when I give this presentation, it's impossible to read this slide, but most people can actually look at it. As you can see up there at the top is the most common boxwood that's available or was available on the market, which was Buxus fruticosa, or the common English boxwood. It is probably the most susceptible variety to the disease. And then as you start to look down the list, you're going to see some plants, more the Asiatic species tend to be a lot more resistant to the disease. I pointed an arrow to the cultivar named SB108, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because that sort of leads us into the new gen thing. But you'll see, you know, there's some microphyllus in there, the Harlandii, different things like that. And so that you can see there's this very clear delineation between varieties and their susceptibility to the disease. Now you do have some plants that are there in the middle that have sempervirens DNA, but have a more open and upright structure that allows for more air movement, and therefore the disease doesn't cause defoliation as quickly and things like that. So the disease doesn't spread as quickly within the plant. So there is some hope for survivability and things like that. So unfortunately, this data proved to be kind of the end of Buxus sempervirens frusicata, or English boxwood. It's more and more growers these days are growing less and less of it. Saunders Brothers wasn't willing to take the risk. And so in 2000, when this data came out, they immediately destroyed the English boxwood that were on property, had a big giant burn pile to get rid of them because it wasn't worth it to potentially risk, you know, infecting other plants in the nursery. Nowadays, Saunders Brothers, through the years, has tried to, you know, based off of this research, they have tried to back off of the susceptible varieties. And so the varieties that are considered the most susceptible are less than 2% of what we grow now. We've really kind of pivoted our production towards the resistant varieties.
Lindsay, so, we have a question about that chart that you just showed. They're asking about availability of seeing that just to study in more depth, and certainly everyone can go back to the recording of this.
Absolutely.
Of this, and I believe your PowerPoint will also be posted
yes.
on that same Canvas site. And I don't know if you guys have this on your New Gen website as well.
It looks a little different. I'm going to actually show, there's a chart on the NewGen website as well it's got both leaf miner and boxwood blight resistance on it. So I'll show that actually in a couple of slides. But yeah, my presentation will be available in PDF format. I can give my contact information after this if anybody would like to email me. I've got a couple of different versions of this chart. So this is the one that came out, pretty sure this is the one that came out of the NC State trials, but there's been a lot more research done. So there's kind of quite a list. The list has gotten much bigger to show, susceptibility. So I have a couple of different charts that I'd be happy to share if people are looking for it. So.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So that research trial at NC State, it ended in 2014. Kelly Ivers, who was leading the project, decided to move and do some research on something else. And so it ended that, but based off of the momentum, Saunders Brothers was so excited and there was so much hope coming out of this. And they had so many varieties of plants that they still wanted to trial. They decided to move towards a private research. So we have sort of a private research farm about 2 hours away from our nursery where we've set up, we've actually worked with retired professors and different things and some different organizations to kind of create, an experiment that is accurate. One of the main things that we really wanted to test is plants in the landscape versus plants in a laboratory. So seeing how the disease moves in a landscape kind of situation and the difference in resistance on that. So we're still working on that. It's still ongoing. The project kind of, as we've collected data over the years, it's kind of moved through a couple of different things. But I think this picture is actually from this year where we brought some more plants in and we're setting up an experiment. So like I said before, results continue to show promise. The two varieties that are actually highlighted, I'm going to talk about. Those are the cultivar names for the NewGen Boxwood that I'm going to talk about. But as you can see, sort of, this is sort of the research that we were taking, or the data that we were taking, seeing the overall average of defoliation and things like that. So, I pointed out green velvet here because green velvet is actually one of the most common varieties sold on the market these days, but it's kind of in that middle area of susceptibility. It's kind of considered medium. It depends on the plant health and its structure and go back to that kind of cultural practices and things you can do to avoid the disease. So if it does get the disease, it can spread within the plant and different things like that. So that was the idea behind a lot of this research, is that even some of the most common varieties were still showing this moderate susceptibility. And so, we continue to do this research. Now I'm going to show a quick video. This will, if you were all looking forward to hearing from Bennett, you still get to hear from Bennett. This is actually from our research plot, and he's talking about SB108, which is one of the NewGen varieties.
Hello, I'm Bennett Saunders, and I am here in our test planning where we're testing the susceptibility of different varieties of boxwood to boxwood blight. These plants were all planted in 2015. This is a test block. I have several smaller plants that were planted beside plants that that were infested with blight. And as you can see, the source plant here is absolutely eaten up with blight. But then here beside me is an SB108. It just looks absolutely beautiful. As we know, there are no plants that are totally resistant to blight. And if I look very, very closely, I can see there's some black lesions and we've lost some leaves right here. But again, considering the pressure that we have right here, this plant is just doing outstanding. It's really, in a landscape, would look great. And again, to look around and get an idea of the pressure, if you look behind me, there's blight. And going down the row here, there's multiple plants with blight. And even on to my right, I see blight all on these, just absolutely eaten up. So just tremendous pressure right here. And so right here in the middle of it, we have this SB108 showing almost no signs whatsoever. It's a plant that we're really excited about, that we think has a lot of potential. Thank you.
So yeah, that is.
Hello, I'm Ben.
There we go. And so like he said, that video was taken in 2018, in July of 2018. Those plants have been there for 3 years. And as we all remember, 2018 was the perfect storm for boxwood. It was an incredibly wet summer. That right there is our pump house, and the river that we pump water out to irrigate the nursery, it's probably about 4 feet below that. We almost flooded our pump house. So it had been just, astronomical. I think we received 90 inches of rain that year, and we averaged about 46 inches of rain a year. So it was really just kind of totally, there was just weeks at a time where it was raining. So 2018 really was kind of that perfect storm for boxwood blight. The reports of boxwood blight in the area were way higher than they had been in years before. And so it ended up being an incredible year for research because, you're putting them through the ringer at that point in time. So with everything that happened, like I had said, there were plants that just continued to outperform. The light bulb went off, and it was like, hey, we've actually got something here, and it's selfish to keep it just to ourselves. And so that's why we created that's why Saunders Brothers created the New Gen brand. So New Gen it stands for the new generation of boxwood, the new genetics, different things like that. It's a branded line of boxwoods, or boxwood, there's never an S on boxwood, characterized by their blight resistance, their leaf miner resistance, as well as their wow factor in the landscape. Those are sort of the 3 main factors that we found to be the most important in regards to the boxwood. Obviously, boxwood blight is a huge one. And in the mid-Atlantic, to have leaf miner resistance, so you don't have to worry about spraying. Although, leaf miner can be easy to take care of, it's still, trying to be stewards of the land. If you don't have to spray, you'd like to not have to spray. So if these plants have their already resistant to the pest, you don't have to worry about it. Same thing with boxwood blight. These plants are characterized by having this disease resistance already. So you have to, with cultural practices, you're not worried about having, the pressures of spraying and different things like that. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Beyond that, like I just said, so characterized by these different, these characteristics. Other factors were important to us as well, as far as grower friendliness, the ease of propagation, winter hardiness. Like this is, if they're not easy to grow, if they're not easy for the homeowner to put in their landscape, then they're not going to last. People don't want to plant them. So it can be an amazing plant, but if it doesn't work in the landscape, it's never going to survive in the industry. So those are sort of the characteristics we were looking for. And beyond all that, one of kind of the most important things that's kind of at the basis of who New Gen is to be a resource of information. I'll show you our website at the end of this presentation just to kind of give you an introduction. We've really worked hard to be a resource of information, to kind of create an encyclopedia. Saunders Brothers has done so many years of research, and they have this huge collection of boxwood knowledge, and we're trying to share that with the industry and also with homeowners and consumers. And so that's really kind of one of our driving factors and the mission behind this project. So we unveiled the brand at the Mid-Atlantic Nursery Trade Show in Baltimore, Maryland in 2019. That was sort of the first introduction to the industry, to everyone, let them know that what we were working on. And then later that year in July at the Cultivate show, it won the Retailer's Choice Award and was one of the new plant introductions that year, which was very exciting, and now we're just really excited about the future. This year, 2020, was the first official year that plants were for sale. So we introduced the concept in 2019, and then in 2020, the plants were for sale. And so far, from even, with everything that we're going through right now, sales have still been strong because people are looking for an answer to these common boxwood problems. So, and we're excited about the future to see where it goes. But like I said, we're really kind of dedicated to teaching about boxwood and sharing information about boxwood. And one of the things that we believe is essential is best management practices. The disease isn't really going anywhere. In fact, we consider at this point in time, this is a managed disease. This isn't this isn't as new as it was before. And so like now, as we have more of an understanding, like we have to understand how to manage this disease in landscapes and things like that. So this has become the new normal. This is what I look like whenever I walk through boxwood houses, or anytime I'm even in a landscape with boxwood, to try to protect myself, because I don't want it to be carried around on my clothing. So we're going to start with some cultural practices. Go back, keep in mind that disease triangle, because that's really kind of, all of these cultural practices are going to be trying to like take a piece of that puzzle away. So one of the things I mentioned before is pruning, how important pruning can be to prevent the spread of boxwood blight. First off, you're going to want to do it when it's dry and when it's cold or cool, you know, at a time the disease isn't active. The spores are going to be moving, they're going to be sticking to your tools, they're going to be sticking on the debris, and so you want to do it at a time where the disease isn't active. So, you know, focusing on the time that's dry and cool, not when it's rainy and hot out. In fact, we recommend, just for everyday boxwood practices, the best time to prune is in early spring, before the flush. Boxwood typically have one main flush, which happens sort of in the early spring or late, kind of, you know, late March early March, where we are in Central Virginia. And the best time to prune is because you can kind of get a uniform pruning, and then that new growth flushes. And so anyway, the other thing is to prune for good air circulation. Like I was saying before, allowing for air movement to go within the plant. Boxwood tend to be very dense. It always entertains me whenever I see an English boxwood and you can just sort of shake it because it's so dense, and the leaves are all just stacked on top of each other. Pruning for that good air circulation. There's lots of practices called thinning, or that you can go through and you can prune branches out of the middle of the plant. Now, I'm not talking about just like pruning holes in your boxwood, unless that's your aesthetic, and then that's fine. But we're talking about just like taking some branches out of the middle so that you can allow air movement. It also helps with light penetration into the plant as well. Another really important cultural practice is mulching. For a long time, people were told that mulching boxwood is a bad idea. And I'm here to tell you that that's wrong, that mulching your boxwood is a great idea. In fact, I highly recommend it. There was recent research out of Virginia Tech that shows a 96% decrease of infection rate from just mulching. And this was done on Buxus sempervirens Justin Browers, which is another one of the most susceptible varieties of boxwood to the disease. And so these were susceptible plants that were planted in a landscape that had boxwood, and there was a 96% decrease of infection just from mulching. And we're just talking about creating a physical barrier. You know, there's not even, it doesn't matter what type of mulch as long as it's not composted boxwood, because that could potentially have the disease, but it doesn't matter if it's pine straw or if it's straw, or if it's, you know, pine bark, different things like that. As long as you're creating sort of I say usually about an inch, that's going to cover the entire soil around the boxwood. And how that works is the pathogen sort of drops down and goes down below the mulch and doesn't splash back up onto the plant. And you're going to want to do that once a year or as needed to add some more, you know, as long as you're keeping coverage. Next is irrigation. Since the disease can move through water, irrigation is really important. I know it'd be lovely if we all had drip irrigation systems running through our gardens. That's the ideal situation, and if you can have that, that's fantastic. Just focusing having that water just staying at the root, because then you're not worried about water splashing throughout the plant. But if that is not the case and you use overhead irrigation, either sprinklers or by hand watering, the key is going to be to do that in a time of the day. We recommend mornings is the best time, because you want those leaves to be able to dry. So if you're watering at 5 o'clock at night, those leaves are going to stay wet all night long. You know, if it's a warm summer night, the disease could be present and it could spread. So that's kind of what again, it goes back to like leaf dry time, air movement, those things are really important. And then obviously variety selection. So if there's natural genetic tolerance or resistance to the disease, planting varieties that already have this, you know, this is part of their genetic makeup. So you don't have to worry about it as much. So, and also another thing about varietal selection, it's also about the location. So if you have a boxwood that's really crowded in its location and there's not as much air movement, either because it's really tight with other plants or it's tight with other boxwood. You know, picking a plant that's going to fill out to that size, because boxwoods last for years and years. So I'm going to kind of talk about what we do at Saunders Brothers. I know it's going to be a little bit different. This is a production setting, so but you can take pieces of it and, you know, from there. What we did is we separated our nursery into boxwood growing areas, highlighted by this map here. Those yellow blocks are where we grow our boxwood, and they are all sort of areas where there is less traffic. You kind of have to go into those areas. Most of it you don't have to drive through just to like get to different parts of the nursery. And within each of those areas, there is a cleaning station. And so our cleaning stations look like this. In that big gray plastic tub on the right-hand side, that's got plastic boot covers and plastic pants, and those have to be worn anytime you're in a boxwood house. So as you come into a boxwood growing area, you're gonna sort of put all of this gear on. All of the workers at the nursery, all of the employees at Saunders Brothers actually have a company issued pair of rubber boots, so they don't have to wear the plastic boot covers. They step over there into that boot bath, and then they scrub their boots, make sure there's no debris on them, take a pump of hand sanitizer. Most of our stations also have a spray bottle of alcohol in case they wanted to spray off their clothing. And then they'll go into the greenhouses, work on the plants, and then as they are leaving that area, they'll have to stop by this station again and sort of take all of that stuff off, clean their boots again, clean their hands, clean their tools and supplies before they leave that area. Now, if a crew is going to be working there and they take a break for lunch, they're going to take everything off, clean their gear, and then they're going to have to sort of scrub in again before they go back into that area, even if it's the same area that they're going back to. So it's, you know, adds a little bit of time, but it's worth it to prevent the disease from entering the nursery. Another thing we did had been a company goal for a long time, and we finally, I guess it was last year, officially moved our customer pickup area off-site. So they've got, it's right around the corner from the nursery, but there's no traffic within the nursery. So unfortunately, customers are they are potentially a pathway for the disease to get into the nursery. So we figured we would just kind of get rid of that. And so our salesperson who receives our customers is up, she's got a shed up there. And she can greet them and help them with their orders. So
Lindsay, we've got a few questions if you have a minute.
Sure.
To deal with a few of those. One goes back to mulching and
okay.
Suggests that it can get deep over time, and wondering if that mulch should be removed or some should be removed each year when new mulch is put down. They suggest that they've seen boxwood where the roots have grown into the mulch instead of the soil because the mulch was so deep.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. I can't say that I have encountered that in my experience, but that doesn't mean that obviously it happens out there. I think if it's starting to get too deep and the mulch is then touching the bottom leaves of the plant, it's starting to kind of defeat the purpose, and so you're going to want to dig some of that mulch out and then replant it. So the key is to have some space between the mulch and the plant so that the disease or the pathogen or the debris of the plant can drop down into the mulch, and instead of splashing back up onto the plant, it's going to go down into the mulch and not splash back up. So you want to kind of create it's creating that physical barrier that's really kind of important. So if it does get built up over time, you're going to want to have to remove some of it.
Okay. The next one is asking about the new gen boxwood and whether it has the scent of an English boxwood.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked this question before. I think all boxwood have that traditional boxwood scent, which some love and some despise. So it's kind of, it's not as noticeable as an English boxwood. It is certainly there. You have to kind of stick your nose in there to find it. In fact, oftentimes at trade shows, back in the time that we could all experience seeing people in person, I've had people actually come up to the plants in the booth and just stick their nose in there to try and smell for the boxwood smell. It is not as obvious, but it is still there. Occasionally I'll have them I'll be moving plants and I'll have them in my car. for like an hour or so, and all of a sudden you're like, it's there. So it's there, but it's just not as strong.
All right, and this is the final one at the current time. Thank you for the Boxwood guide online, and wondering what else you're doing beyond the presenting of new generation regarding varieties which are blight resistant. I guess wondering more about the research, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not quite clear in the question.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to talk about that in a little bit. So once we kind of talk about the future and what sort of research projects we're continuing on. So we are still continuing to do research, and I'll get to that in a couple of different slides. And if that doesn't answer the question, feel free to ask me again.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay.
Sure thing. All right. The next thing we are going to talk about is chemical control. Now, my caveat whenever I talk about chemical control is that, again, this is from the perspective of a production nursery. So there are different products that we have that are available to us based, different formulations, different things like that, based on sort of a production setting versus a greenhouse versus a landscape. And so anytime that you are using fungicides, it's always important to talk with your extension agent to see what's available in your area. If you're using something that you buy at like a local garden shop, or talk to the people that are there that are knowledgeable, and always make sure that you are reading labels. Different products are recommended for different things, so it's absolutely essential. And so everything that I say, everything, I'm going to actually give you a sample of the rotation, the chemical rotation that we use at the nursery, because we've worked with researchers in extension to develop that. So anytime you're using, pesticides or fungicides specifically, always make sure, you're following the labels. It's really important when you're working these things. So that's my little disclaimer. About that, make sure if you are using fungicides, make sure that you're using them in a rotation. Make sure you're rotating active ingredients, because you don't want to develop any resistance in the disease, because then we have, that's how the fungus it mutates and things like that. You don't want that, because we're working with what we know. And as of this time, there are only preventative fungicides available on the market. Nothing is curative. So even if you have the disease, spraying will prevent the spread of that disease. And some of the products have what's called back action, where they kind of go back and they kill like some of the spores, but they're just mostly going to prevent a further infection or the disease from spreading. So keep that in mind. And obviously the other thing about, when we talk about chemical control, we talk about sanitation, which is something we are all incredibly familiar with at the moment. And, sanitation for boxwood blight is similar to lots of viruses and fungus and bacteria and things like that. And so the products that you can use to sanitize are readily available, maybe less available at the moment, but they are readily available at your grocery stores and things like that. Isopropyl alcohol, which is, we're talking basic rubbing alcohol that you find at the store at a concentration of 70% or higher, will kill the pathogen. So that can be used. That's what we keep, hand sanitizer, and we keep spray bottles. In fact, I have a spray bottle of alcohol that I keep in my personal vehicle that I use to spray off my shoes and pants anytime I've been around boxwood. You can also use a bleach solution. So as long as it's a 10% bleach solution, obviously you don't want to be spraying your clothes with this, but you can be spraying tools, spraying hoses that have gone through a landscape, different things like that. It'll also kill the pathogen, as well as sort of brand name Lysol. When we're talking about, the Lysol, that's the one that kills 99.9% of viruses, bacteria, and fungus. So that's the Lysol we're talking about. So in fact, the Virginia Tech Boxwood Blight Task Force has an incredible list of sanitizing agents, and it gives you details about products that are available. I mean, your basic products that are available for sanitation. So I highly recommend checking out that website as well. Now, foot baths are a great thing, whether you're hosting people in your garden or you're going to a garden. These are actually outside of our office at Saunders Brothers. So they're at all of our entryways. And so all of our customers or our employees, anytime they walk in and out of the office, they have to step on these mats. So they're filled with, the product that we use is a sort of hydrogen peroxide type product that's available. It's more of a commercial product. that's just used as a sanitizing agent. And so that's another effective one. So cleans the bottom of your shoes is just another way, you know, anything that could be brought into the office. There's also a boot scraper and things like that. So this is a great option, easy option. In fact, I get a lot of calls from gardeners and things like that. And so I've recommended for gardeners that are concerned because they're having a garden party, but they are concerned about people bringing in Boxwood blight. You know, this is one great tool to use, you know, as long as you don't step too hard on it and squish all the water into your shoes. For your reference, this is actually an example of a spray rotation that we use at Saunders Brothers. It's, like I said, we developed this with extension and with researcher. Yeah, so we spray bi-weekly during the active part of the season. So you don't need to spray constantly. You just need to know when the disease is active. We start with chlorothalonil, which is a common sort of, which is listed effective on preventing boxwood blight. Then 2 weeks later, we use combination product, and then we go back to using chlorothalonil, then another combination product. You know, there's lots of different products that have different sort of, different versions of these kind of active ingredients. So this is just sort of a sample of a rotation. You're getting kind of different active ingredients that have different modes of actions and things like that. So it's you know, it's making sure you're rotating through them. And like I mentioned before, one of the most effective ways to prevent the disease is by planting varieties that are naturally resistant or tolerant. The words, it's kind of interchangeable. I think HRI decided recently that the correct word is resistance, but tolerance are sort of interchangeable. The most susceptible, like I said before, is going to be the English boxwood and also the American boxwood. So that's going to be the Buxus sempervirens and Buxus sempervirens fruticosa. The most resistant, so these are sort of broad stroke characteristics. The most susceptible are going to be those, and then the most resistant are going to be the Asiatic species, so Buxus microphylla, Insularis, Harlandii. Those are going to be the varieties that are going to show more genetic resistance. In fact, that bottom picture below is the plant that Bennett showed in the video, the SB108, which is New Gen Independence. In fact, yeah, I realized I didn't even say there's 2 varieties, New Gen Independence and New Gen Freedom, that are part of this branded line. But New Gen Independence, you know, as you can see, those plants have been in the same location for 3 years. And, you know, that picture's worth 1,000 words as far as what genetic resistance really means. So, you know, there's been extensive testing. We've tested over 157 varieties so far, as we have different varieties, either new varieties that have been bred or seed selections or different things like that. We'll continue to do some research. So that brings us to, you know, the future, looking towards the future. One thing I'd sort of like to mention is that, you know, just because English boxwood are the most susceptible varieties, it doesn't mean that they never have to be planted again. Kind of one of the biggest concepts behind the genetic resistance is, you know, these plants can become the workhorses. They're just as beautiful as, you know, the common English boxwood, and so they can be used, and then over time we see a natural decrease in overall, you know, pathogen in the environment. So just to kind of keep that in mind, I'm not saying burn every sempervirens that's out there. So this is, you know, it's creating kind of a change in production as a whole. So you know, we all love our boxwoods. This is Mr. Saunders with his favorite variety, D-Rump boxwood. But mentioned before, you know, a lot of the talk in the industry has kind of moved towards finding replacements for boxwood because people are just kind of frustrated and they don't know what to do. And, you know, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm a boxwood enthusiast, but I really think that, you know, we truly believe that there's no real replacement for boxwood. Yeah, these plants are beautiful, and it's hard to find something that's going to be able to be used in the, you know, hedging for hundreds and hundreds of linear feet of boxwood, hedging and things like that. You know, these are great plants. There's nothing quite like it. Some people will say ilex is a great substitute. Also another beautiful plant, but For how long does it really last? It's kind of grown in a different environment, has different needs, it's susceptible to other diseases and pests that boxwood aren't susceptible to. You know, there's also have to worry about wildlife pressures and things like that. But truly, you know, what other plant can grow in this many different shapes and sizes and can be used to create beautiful, you know, works of art such as this. So like I said, maybe I'm biased, but I'm truly a boxwood enthusiast, and I don't think that anything will ever truly replace a boxwood. So we just really believe that the future of boxwood is going to be in better boxwood blight resistance. Like I said, these plants can become the workhorses in the landscape and in the garden. They can, you know, it's going to decrease the amount of pathogen that's in the environment. And, you know, you're not having to spray as much, you're not having to do these things. So with good cultural practices, you know, these plants can thrive in the landscape for years and years to come. So now this is sort of what I mentioned when you asked about what else we were doing besides just the new gen boxwood. So we're not done yet. We have 2 varieties right now, but that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's really, you know, we're really focusing, we really think that these boxwood blight resistant plants are the future of the industry and the future of boxwood. And so we're continuing to do research. We started doing a little bit of breeding to see what, you know, and there's other breeders that are, you know, they're breeding for different things, but we're starting to look at boxwood blight resistance. We're also doing some seedling evaluation and continuing to do research. Like I said, at that research plot, you know, we're continuing to work on different projects, different things on the landscape. One of our recent projects this year that we took on is planting resistant varieties in landscapes that have been affected by blight. So that's kind of an unknown. People are like, oh, I had boxwood blight, I removed my English boxwood, what am I supposed to do? You know, trying to do some research and get some answers on how to respond to that, because that's becoming more and more of an issue because more and more people are having experience with blight. So we're continuing.
Lindsay, similar to that, kind of on that same theme, we've got a question asking if a client has established boxwood plantings and they're wanting to add more boxwood to that landscape, what can they do to ensure they don't bring in boxwood blight to the existing plants, even, and then they state even a resistant plant can carry the fungus, correct?
Yeah, so well, there's been some research done that they could carry the plant, but you would see it develop on the plant. So the difference in the sort of the genetic tolerance has more to do with how the disease moves in the plant. So they are, like Bennett said in that video, you'll still see spots, you'll still see signs of the disease, but what happens is it just doesn't take over the plant, it doesn't defoliate and kill the whole plant. You know, in the research that we've done, I don't think we've lost a single one of our, like, you know, the resistant plants to the disease, versus, you know, some of the really susceptible varieties, it'll just kind of defoliate and kill the whole plant. So it'll show up, you're looking at, like, you know, a much smaller infection rate. So I kind of think in the way that, you know, different people experience the common cold in different ways. And it's, you know, there's varying sort of severity of how, you know, it's responded. And so it's that the genetic tolerance within the plant basically just means that the disease doesn't spread throughout the plant so quickly. So anyway, all of that being said, to answer the question is, if you are bringing new plants into a landscape, I think the most important thing would be to start by quarantining them for, you know, as long as you possibly can, to really give them a chance. You know, and almost, in fact, actually this greenhouse that we have pictured, you see those trays in the middle, those are actually Saffruticosa boxwood. So we took some, you know, we have some cuttings that we use for research, and those are there to be our sort of canary in the coal mine. So if that disease is present, by having a susceptible plant in there, and it's going to show up quicker than it might on a resistant variety. But, you know, take those plants, quarantine them in a place that they're not close to the boxwoods, almost treat them as if they have potentially symptoms, like, you know, they potentially have the pathogen. That might be an instance where you want to kind of encourage the infection to show up. So if, you know, watering, kind of, you know, doing everything I told you not to do as far as like trying to see if the infection shows up. basically like kind of running your own experiment to make sure that those plants are clean. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm happy to elaborate more if not.
I think that was good. We've also got another question about deer resistance of boxwood.
Yeah.
Just wondering.
Yeah,
They're asking.
all boxwood varieties are resistant to deer, which is nice. If you live in a place like I do and the deer like to munch on everything in your landscape.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah, so I'm almost done. We've got a few more things. Giving you some tips on sort of being boxwood smart, being blight smart, boxwood blight smart. I think the biggest thing is to stay educated. I think the most powerful tool in your toolbox is going to be knowledge. Having conversations, you know, anytime a landscaper comes onto your property or you're working in an area with boxwood, just being smart and being diligent, knowing, you know, what the disease looks like and not spreading it. I think that's really, really important. You know, I think, you know, through everything that we're all going through right now, where it's all about kind of staying educated and trying to protect yourself and protecting others, you know, protect the plants, treat things, you know, make sure that you're not spreading the disease. Using compliant suppliers, so, you know, talking to the people who are producing your plants, making sure that they're aware of the disease and, you know, taking the necessary actions. In the state of Virginia, there's a boxwood blight compliance agreement. So making sure that where the plants came from, you know, that they participate in that program. It's voluntary. I believe it's voluntary. But yeah, you know, just making sure that those plants are clean and that, you know, growers are complying to those agreements. Using reputable landscapers, like I said, talking to them, making sure that they're aware of the disease. And, you know, it's okay to ask them what they're doing to prevent the spread of it. Cleaning up between gardens. So if you're traveling between gardens or even just different places within your own landscape and garden, kind of cleaning up your tools, cleaning up, you know, any of the supplies. If you're dragging a hose through, you know, it might be worthwhile to have a Lysol wipe and just wipe it down and make sure you're not spreading that disease even in your own landscape or between gardens. Like I said, pruning when it's dry, usually before the summertime. You know, cleaning your tools between landscape or like through landscape blocks and different things like that. Avoiding the overhead irrigation when you can. If you can't, making sure you're irrigating early in the morning so that they have the entire day to dry. Pruning for air circulation, just providing good air circulation as best as you can. Planting in places where there are, you know, there's better circulation, making sure you're not crowding it with too many plants, things like that. Mulching, like we mentioned before. And then planting more resistant cultivars when you have, you know, when you can. So if you're planting a new landscape, it's worthwhile to explore, you know, more resistant cultivars. That chart that I mentioned before, this is kind of it's an easier, more digestible one. This is produced by Saunders Brothers, and so this is the varieties that they grow. Most common varieties in the market. It was sort of centered around the most common ones that they were growing at the time. I'm not sure that they carry all of them anymore, all of them still. But this kind of gives you kind of the blight tolerance and the leaf miner resistance all sort of in one package. And that's on the New Gen website as well as available in the Boxwood guide. And like I said, my PDF will be available that you can look at this. If blight is suspected in a landscape, take samples. If you're looking at something and you're really kind of getting concerned that it is boxwood blight, I would treat it like it is in that moment. Kind of try to limit movement, make sure people or animals aren't going through that area. Take samples. You can send them to the Plant Disease Clinic at Virginia Tech, and they'll be able to identify it for you. They've seen a lot of it, so they might even be able to give you a call before they've cultured out, be like, that looks like blight, or, you know, it doesn't, and then they'll culture it out for you and let you know. If it is confirmed, carefully remove the plants. You obviously want to get them out of that landscape, but you want to take care not to spread debris and leaves around and further the infection. Remove as many of the leaves from the ground. So anything that does drop to the ground, you're going to want to remove it as much as you can from that area. We say, you know, the best way is to start by removing the above ground portion of the plant first, and then you're also going to want to remove the roots. If you're going to replant with boxwood, obviously, but also trying to get, you know, as much of the pathogen out of the soil as you can. Sanitize. So that's, if you can sanitize your landscape, if you can burn the ground around it to make sure that you're sanitizing and killing any of the spores that could be there. Also sanitizing all of your equipment and yourself. Another thing that I want to mention is that clothing, if you've been in a boxwood area, launder those clothing. Just a normal laundry cycle, the soap and the warm water will kill the pathogen. So if if you've gone in an area where boxwood blight exists, make sure that those clothes get washed, immediately as best as you can. And sanitizing and make sure you're not spreading the pathogen on you. If you're replanting, make sure you're planting with resistant varieties. It's too often I see growers will have, or people will have an English boxwood and then they'll turn around and plant another English boxwood. I wouldn't recommend that. Obviously, it's very susceptible, and if the pathogen still exists in the soil, you're just gonna infect that one as well. So if you're gonna replant, plant a resistant variety, and make sure you're mulching, and just keep an eye about it. Being diligent and knowing that the disease was there in the first place, you can spot it early on. There are plants that have survived, that have been infected, and then people have responded quickly and pruned it out and sanitized and used fungicides to prevent any spread, and the plant can survive. So just to be smart, use the BMPs that we mentioned here and on our website, as well as there's lots of great resources, not only the Virginia Tech Extension, the Virginia Tech Boxwood Blight Task Force has an amazing website. HRI, the Horticulture Research Institute, also has a page on boxwood BMPs, and so there's lots of information out there. Stay educated; it's really important. And in the future of boxwood, we're always sort of looking towards the horizon. As soon as you get over one bump in the road, there's always another challenge. If you've sort of seen the news about boxwood, there is another pest in Europe that is the boxwood tree moth. In fact, I was in Europe in 2018 and I got to see it firsthand and the damage. We actually spent some time talking to growers to learn about it, trying to stay ahead of it. It is not in the US as of now, but with globalization and the way that the world is, sometimes it's just a matter of time. But, we really raised the alarm. We've talked to, HRI and different groups that they're already starting research, and they're working on taking initiatives. Even just recently, APHIS there's a program to try and keep boxwood. There's an inspection for boxwood tree moth coming into the United States. So just staying diligent, the future of boxwood, it's going to constantly be changing, but these plants, they're one of the oldest ornamental plants, and we don't think they're going anywhere. So I say keep planting boxwood. And I'll take any other questions. If there's not, I can jump over and show you our website real quick.
Great, Lindsay. I do have a few questions in the Q&A box, and feel free to keep typing those in as we talk, and hopefully we'll still get a chance for Lindsay to show the website. The first one is it recommended to spray your boxwood prophylactically with rotation plan, I guess as a preventative measure?
Yeah, I think it depends sort of on the feasibility. I think if you have boxwood that you really care about and they're in a place that gets high traffic or could potentially get high traffic, I think spraying preventatively is important. That's why we do it at our nursery. Knock on wood, we have no known cases of boxwood that have ever entered Saunders Brothers Nursery, but we spray preventatively because we want to keep it that way. And so I think that it's definitely worthwhile. It's definitely something to consider, especially on properties that have lots of boxwood, or lots of English boxwood, or even sempervirens it could spread quickly. Working either with landscapers or different things like that, I would recommend spraying on a rotation. Obviously, different people have different comfort levels with spraying, so one tried and true method isn't necessarily the end all be all. But I think, I would recommend it as a management practice to prevent the disease. And again, go back to, focusing on that disease trial. So spraying when the environmental conditions are right for the infection to occur. So if it's, if you have a week where it's 90 degrees every day, as miserable as that might be, you don't have to worry about spraying in times like that because the disease is going to be inactive, or during the winter, things like that.
Okay, the next one, do you recommend avoiding putting a new gen in a hole or near a hole of one removed for blight?
Um, this is a hard question to answer because we're still working on the research. So I can't 100% say if you plant a new gen boxwood into a hole where there was blight that it's never going to get blight. I can't in good confidence promise you that. However, planting a new gen boxwood in a place you're setting yourself up much more likely for success than you were if you were to plant a susceptible variety. So these plants are some of the most resistant of the plants on the market. You know, in the testing that we have done, like we picked them out of the top. They were both seed selections that we just had in our sort of collection. And so we kind of threw them into the trials and they just consistently outperformed. So it goes back to that thing that even if they do get the disease, it's not going to take over the plant. You know, you saw that new gen independence, the SV108 that Bennett pointed out, you know, that's right next to a plant. It had a little bit of the disease on it, but you know, you would be able to prune that out and sanitize and mulch and keep an eye on it. And it's not going to just take over the whole plant. It's one of those situations that not just because the disease, just because a plant has been infected with the disease is not necessarily a death sentence based on those management practices. If you know that there has been blight in a location, then the key is to stay diligent and keep an eye on it. So using those cultural practices, using, you know, if you choose to use chemical controls, different things like that, I think that it could be preventable and it's unlikely that you would see blight and even less likely that the plant would die because of the blight. That answers your question? It's not a black and white one.
I think it does.
Have some research, you know, in the next year or so where we can give a more concrete answer of like actual data, actual numbers, this is what you're looking at. So.
Okay, the next question is to talk a little bit about the difference or recognizing the difference between decline versus blight.
Sure. Yeah, so decline is characterized, it's much slower. It's kind of like the slow death of boxwood. So it starts kind of like you'll start to just see a section of the boxwood kind of go off color. And it'll be like a whole section of the plant will start to kind of just turn off color. And then the leaves will start to turn like brownish or bronze, and then they turn brown. But they hold on to the plant for a long time. And so that's sort of the main difference is the speed. So boxwood blight happens very quickly and boxwood decline happens very slowly. You don't often see leaf spot the same way that you do with boxwood blight. Sometimes volutella, which is a secondary disease of boxwood, you know, it's kind of an advantageous pathogen that will take a declining boxwood and kind of like wreak havoc on this poor dying boxwood. But it's gonna look a little bit different. So, and the like, I don't have pictures of volutella, but it's a much different looking fungus. So you're looking kind of for those leaf spots. Also, you're not going to see that black streaking on the stems. That is, those lesions on the stems is characteristic of boxwood blight. You don't see that with any other boxwood disease.
Okay, thanks. The final question I have right now is to mention again the names of the two new gen varieties you have.
Yeah, I can't believe, don't tell them. I'm the marketing manager of this branded line, and I forgot to mention the plants themselves. So there are two varieties. They are New Gen Independence and New Gen Freedom. Those are the branded names of those plants. They are available to the industry. We have 5 partner growers that are selling them, so they're wholesalers, so you have to look to see where they sell in your area. But they are available to the market this year. You know, we've added other growers, and so we're going to continue to expand. And I know we have, I think they opened up people from all over the U.S. So you know they're continuing to expand into other areas of the U.S. besides just sort of the East Coast. So, yeah.
And Lindsay, I'll just let you know, I've been putting some things in the chat box for folks. I've posted your newgenboxwood.com website. I've also put in the link to the Boxwood Blight Task Force, and I'm getting ready to post the direct link for the contact information for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Okay, if they come in, I'll let you know. But if you want to switch over and show the website and go through anything there, that would be fantastic. We have time.
Yeah. Put up. Can you still see my screen or did it go away?
We're just seeing you right now.
Let me pull it back up. How about now?
That's got it.
Great. So this is our New Gen Boxwood website. So like I said before, so New Gen was kind of created from Saunders Brothers. Basically, they had all of these years of boxwood research and information, and they just wanted to put it in a place that was more accessible to both the industry and to consumers. And so we're kind of, you know, if anyone is familiar with the Saunders Brothers Boxwood Guide, we're trying to build on that here. So it's not necessarily going away. We're just we're trying to really create this resource for people to learn more about boxwood. One of the biggest sections that you'd probably focus on is this boxwood info up here. So one of the pages that we worked on is it's supposed to be kind of like a diagnosing your boxwood problems on your own. So some of the most common problems, like I said, we've got boxwood leaf miner, boxwood blight, phytophthora root rot, which you can see. You know, we've got some pictures of boxwood decline. Also, you know, things like frost or freeze damage or cold injury. So that's kind of where we started. We're going to continue adding to this. You know, we hope to add mites and other boxwood pests that you might see to really help people be able to diagnose boxwood problems on their own. We've got lots of pictures, you know, and as you click through the pictures, they've got captions that kind of tell you and explain more about it. So that's kind of our catch-all. And then we jump in, I know specifically they asked about leaf miner, so I'll start by showing you the leaf miner page. We really kind of tried to give a whole bunch of information about boxwood leaf miner here. So if you click this picture here, it's going to bring you down, you know, it's going to take you to this part of the page. So you can either scroll through the whole page or you can click those boxes if you're trying to jump along. So right here, you know, we've got pictures of a life cycle of boxwood leaf miner. So understanding the life cycles, that's how you can kind of understand how to treat the leaf miner. And so like I was saying, the best time to treat is actually going to be late June or even early July, because you've got 9 months that the larvae are feeding and are living on the inside of that leaf. So that systemic insecticide is going to be taken up into the plant and they're going to consume it, and then the larvae are going to die. So you're not going to have a hatching of adults the next year. And so, you know, kind of just a little bit of explanation. Also, best, you know, ways to identify it and what time of year you're going to see those different symptoms. And as you just go through the website, we've got some pictures and identifying it, you know, some prevention and control tips. This is what I was saying where we talk about the chemical control options in here. As far as, you know, other control options, we've got the list right here of leaf miner resistance. And then we talk a little bit about New Gen independence and New Gen freedom. So I'll also show you our page on boxwood blight. This one's a little bit longer because we've got a little bit more information. So like I said, you can kind of click any of these links and it can jump you down to that section. So, you know, going through, this is gonna be tips on understanding the disease as a whole, similar to what I talked about, but much more in depth. You know, we've got the disease triangle on there for reference. So you can look at sort of the notes that I made today. We've got a photo gallery here, so more pictures of the leaf spot, as well as pictures of the lesions and what defoliation looks like. Same here that, you know, these pictures are captioned to kind of explain to you what you're seeing and what those symptoms look like. So we've got that there. And for fellow boxwood enthusiasts, we've also got, you know, we've got a page on planting and site selection, as well as boxwood care, as well as just our boxwood photo garden, which is just pictures of beautiful boxwood we've seen through the years that we wanted to share with you all. And that's what I've got. There's also information about, you know, the New Gen varieties and a little bit about us, our story, the research we've done, our partners, where you can find the plants, different things like that. So, yeah. We do a monthly newsletter as well. Each, you know, it's filled with both information about New Gen boxwood, but we also, there's articles on leaf miner and blight, you know, updated research, boxwood care tips, everything like that. So if you're interested in receiving that, you can sign up for it on the website, or you can just email me and let me know, and I'm happy to add you to the list. So, yeah. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Lindsay. We do have at least one more in the box.
Great.
And also just because I understand some of your operation, but you mentioned how currently there's been no reported boxwood blight on your production operation, but all the trials and the research and all of that is being done at a different farm in a different location.
Yes. So our research plot is, so our farm in Piney River, there's no, knock on wood. I'm scared to say it. 2020 has been a year. So, but yeah, at the Saunders Brothers site in Piney River, there's no known cases of boxwood blight. We've been able to keep it out of the nursery, and we're continuing to work hard to prevent it from ever, in fact, coming into the nursery. But yeah, our research plot, it's about 2 hours away from the nursery. So it's pretty far away. And in fact, anytime one of us visits the research plot, we're not allowed to go in Boxwood area for 48 hours. So we typically try to visit it sort of towards the end of the week. In fact, I've been down there a couple times, and each time those close, the moment I come home, we typically take rental vehicles. We won't even take company vehicles because we just, trying to eliminate any chance of carrying it with us. So.
Yeah, that's incredible. The extreme measures you guys are going to,
yeah.
But certainly
Boxwood are
understandable.
really important to us. They're probably 30 cents to every dollar that the company makes. So they're really important to us. And so, we're trying really hard to prevent, we recognize that everyone might not go to these extremes, but yeah, so it's kind of our mentality.
Understood. Okay, some more questions from our audience.
Sure.
What is the lifespan for boxwoods, and is boxwood decline inevitable?
That's a tough one to answer, because I have seen boxes that are hundreds of years old. Boxwood decline is not inevitable. It's only happens to English boxwood. So in my experience, I've only ever seen it on English boxwood. And I think the Saunders will tell you the same thing. So these different varieties, that's why Mr. Saunders started looking towards different varieties back in the 70s and 80s, is because it wasn't happening to these other plants. So I don't know that it's inevitable on all English boxwood. It's common. It's one of those things where it's a multifaceted slow decline. It's not necessarily like a disease, or it's a combination of kind of environmental, there's nematodes, there's different things that kind of cause it to happen over time. But yeah, it's not necessarily going to happen, and it won't happen to other varieties.
All right, the next question is, how does one purchase one of the new gen boxwoods?
Sure. While I'm still on the website, our partners are listed here on the website. So we've got 5 partners right now that have the plants for sale this year, and then we're going to continue to add to this. Hopefully next year we'll have even more. We've already added growers to the program. They're just still in the number building phase. So as they have plants available, they'll be added to this website. Like I said before, these are all wholesale nurseries, so you'll have to kind of go to their website. I recommend, so Saunders Brothers website right here, they have this great function. Where is it? Down here it says where to buy. So you can type in your zip code. I'll type in my zip code, look for, 25 miles around me. I can find landscapers and garden centers in the area that sell Saunders Brothers plants. Now, you might want to contact the garden center to make sure that they have the new gen plants. But if they buy new gen, or if they buy Saunders Brothers boxwood, hopefully they've added it to their inventory.
All right. There's a question if they can be purchased in New Jersey, because of the 1,200 registered attendees for Master Gardener College, we have at least 100 from other states. So not only Virginia attendees here, we have some other states joining us. So question for New Jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our partners is Over to Vest Nursery in New Jersey. Now, so I will say, A lot of these growers sell all up and down sort of the Northeast and even the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic and kind of down, you know, we've even got Sheridan Nursery, which is located in Toronto, Ontario. So they're kind of up there. Saunders Brothers sells all the way out to Tennessee, down to North Carolina, and up into New Jersey. So there's a chance that, you know, I would start on the Saunders Brothers website and check there. We've also got a partner, Over to Best Nurseries in Bridgeton, New Jersey. And we'll be working with another grower that's going to have plants in the next couple years and next year or so. That's also in New Jersey, as well as, you know, Willoway is in Ohio and Pride's Corner in Connecticut. So they all kind of sell in that area. So maybe start with the Saunders Brothers website. And if you can't find it there, check with Over to Best Nursery and see, you know, find out where those plants are sold.
All right, this has been fantastic.
Sure
At this time, I think I've addressed all of the questions and comments in the Q&A box. So unless there are any final ones coming in here real quick, not seeing any. I think we're at the end, and timing is just perfect. We're at 3:26, so just a couple extra minutes. But Lindsay, thank you so very much for joining us for our virtual Master Gardener College. Great to have you. Fantastic presentation. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Y'all take care.
Bye.
Bye.